Hey guys.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor live Sunday video. Tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about some exciting news that we have. We actually bought a house. This is our first night in it. We're recording from there. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the process of home buying as a travel therapist. That's a question that we get a lot. And so we got some feedback from some other travelers. We also have our experience to share. So that's the main topic tonight. If you guys are joining and you have any questions, feel free to ask those in the comments and we will answer them. Whitney's going to introduce us and then we'll get started with the video.
All right. Hey everybody. Thank you so much for joining with us tonight. My name is Whitney Aiken.
I'm Jared Kazazza.
And we are both traveling physical therapists. I know that many of you guys have probably watched our videos in the past, but for some of you it may be your first time watching our videos. So tonight I'll give you a little bit of background about kind of our situation. As Jared said, we just bought a house and tonight is actually our first night staying in our new house.
It might be an echo too because we have almost nothing in here. So
yeah, so we're there's a little bit of an echo. We're playing around with the lighting and also we don't have internet yet. So I'm going off of my phone data tonight rather than the internet. So please let us know if there's any problem with the connection. And if so, we apologize. So we'll be talking a little bit about kind of our experience with buying a house and our plans for the future. And then we're going to talk about home buying in general. Many of you guys that may follow us on Facebook or Instagram might have seen this week I asked for some feedback from some other travelers to get some insight from them about their experiences with home buying or owning their own home while they're away as a travel therapist. We wanted to give you guys kind of a variety of input because our situation may not be the exact same as somebody else's situation, but maybe you can learn from a different traveler. So Jared is going to get our video shared in just a couple of groups here, and then we'll kind of jump into the topic. It looks like we might have a little problem with the connection. Can you guys let us know if you can hear us? I'm just going to check here. Yeah, so again, we don't have internet right now because we just moved in. So I'm trying to use just my regular phone data and I hope it works. If you guys can let us know if you can hear us because it looks like we might not be recording.
yeah, I'm not sure.
Sorry for the technical difficulty, guys. If it does not work, I don't know what we're gonna do.
I can always try my phone.
Yeah. If anybody is watching, if you can just let us know if you can see us and hear us still. If not, we'll try to, oh, it looks like we kind of came back. Did we cut out, guys, for a little while there? Let us know. Okay, well, we'll try to carry on, and I'm sorry again if we have any technical difficulty tonight. We appreciate you guys tuning in. If you are watching live, we'd love if you'd say hello and just leave us a comment below and let us know if you can hear us. Let us know who you are. Are you a current traveler? Are you somebody who's thinking about traveling? So we'll just kind of tell you guys in a little bit of a story, just our background over the past few years.
So basically, we've been traveling now for almost 5 years. That whole time, our tax home has been a room in a house. So we take such little time off that has worked out pretty well for us. When we're in our hometown, we pay rent every month. We go back home every so often, and it's usually only for a couple weeks at a time. So that has been fine for us for the last 5 years or so. We plan to do that for probably another year, but with everything happening with coronavirus right now, we're supposed to be out of the country. Well, it turns out now this is going to be the longest period that we've had to stay at home at any one time. So we decided, okay, now might be a good time for us to get a place together and move all of our stuff in and have everything in one area. This is kind of like a downtime. Essentially, we can't take contracts. We could, but there's not a lot available. And we can't travel internationally. We can't really travel domestically. So it's kind of a good time now to kind of get things in order. We've sort of been looking off and on for a couple of years if something good popped up, but in our hometown we didn't find anything that we really excited about or didn't make sense price-wise. And we found this place 2 weeks ago today. We saw a for sale sign, called about it, and then now 2 weeks later we've already closed and we're mostly moved in. So it happened really fast. We really weren't expecting it to go that way, but it's been awesome, and I think it's going to turn out well.
Yeah, so like Jared said, over the past few years, we had each individually just used our parents' houses as our tax home. I've always had my permanent residence at my parents' house, and him too, and that works really well for us. We had the camper for a while. I know a lot of you guys know us from Fifth Wheel PT, so we lived in the camper when we would travel around for work for a few years, and then if we were ever in town, we're from Virginia, we would just stay with our parents. And in addition to sort of in the back of our mind for a while, we had thought it'd be nice to have our own apartment or house or condo, but we just sort of thought, well, maybe not yet. But in addition to that, Jared had been saving up for a while because he's been wanting to get into real estate investing for a long time, probably
over a decade. I took real estate classes back in college. My first 2 years of college, I took some real estate classes, and initially, before I ever went into PT or anything health related, I was actually thinking about going into real estate and being a realtor. So I've been looking for investment properties for probably 12 or 13 years.
So we had been saving up for a while, just thinking, you know, eventually we would want to either get a house or an apartment or condo for ourselves, and or something as a real estate option for rental property. So we've been saving up for a while, and we had thought, we kind of gone back and forth about doing a cash payment on a house. We kind of are used to like the tiny living, having lived in the RV. So we weren't planning on getting some crazy big house. We were thinking maybe in our area, housing prices are relatively low in Virginia where we're from. So we were thinking we might, you know, get a house that was $100,000 or less, or a condo or something like that, and either buy it in cash or have a big cash down payment. So we just have a really small mortgage.
We were looking at 2 and 3 bedroom places mostly.
Yeah, and so we were sort of gonna wait actually. So I know a lot of people right now have been saying, oh, this might be a good time to buy a house. Based on everything that Jared has studied and learned, and what we kind of think might happen with the economy, we actually thought that in a few months from now, maybe 3, 6, 9 months from now, would actually see some better housing costs. But this one literally fell in our laps.
It fell in our laps, yeah. I wanted to wait 3 to 6 months, like Whitney said. I think housing prices will likely go down due to everything going on right now with people not being able to pay rent and making their mortgage payments and things like that. I think there will probably be some foreclosures, which means lower priced housing. I think in addition to foreclosures, I think there will also be, lenders will be tightening up the restrictions on buyers getting mortgages. So for a cash buyer or for someone with a big down payment and good credit score, I think there's gonna be a lot of opportunities coming up. So I wanted to wait, but this place was literally the best priced for what it is that we've seen in 10 years. So
Yeah.
really couldn't pass it up.
So I definitely want to tell you guys a little bit more detail about what we ended up buying and why it works perfect for us and what our plans are with our property in the future. But real quick, I just want to double check and make sure that you guys can hear us. I see a few people are on live. Hi Ryan, hi Vanessa, hi Matt. Sharon said a couple minutes ago that we were kind of cutting out briefly. Can you guys let us know if the video is still cutting out or if you can hear us? Hi Billy, hey Matt, thanks for saying that. He said congrats. Hey Travis, hey Inky. We appreciate y'all tuning in live, but again, if you just leave us a comment and let us know whether you can hear us, so we don't record a whole hour-long video if you can't hear us. But we appreciate you guys tuning in live. So just a little bit more kind of about what we ended up getting. So we had considered kind of, like I said, an apartment, a condo, a small house. We actually have one of Jared's family members that was sort of in need of a place to live for a little while as well. And it was kind of we were looking at it like, well, we don't need a place all the time and she needs a place. So we thought, okay, maybe we could get something where we could all live together, so that it would work out for all of us because we're only gonna be in town sometimes. So we kind of, in looking at layouts of different properties, oh, Vanessa said the connection is good now. Thank you, Vanessa, we appreciate it. So in looking at properties, we kind of decided that a townhouse layout was gonna be really good for us for a few different reasons.
One is that the costs are obviously usually lower than like a single family home. The other thing is that maintenance is minimal when you're in a townhouse where the exterior is maintained by the HOA. Those were two big reasons.
The other thing is the layout.
Yeah, the layout is nice, especially the townhouses that have a third floor, a basement area, because there's additional living space. So compared to like a condo or an apartment, a townhouse seemed like it would be a lot better for us.
Yeah, and compared to a house, we kind of wanted something a little bit low maintenance because we won't really be around.
We still only plan to be here probably 2 months a year maybe. And that's gonna be spaced out throughout the year. So we'll probably take a contract, travel internationally, stop back in for a while, but it's not gonna be any kind of long-term settling down for us.
Yep, so the townhouse we ended up finding, the reason we said it kind of fell in our laps is we were going back and forth between whether we might buy a place versus just rent a place for a little while. And this complex where the townhouse is, there was one across the street from here, or across the parking lot from here, that was for rent. And we had actually just driven by, well actually my mom drove by and was looking at the one that was for rent, and then saw right across the parking lot there was one that was for sale and it wasn't listed. So it actually turned out there's a guy who kind of buys and fixes up and flips houses. So he had done a flip on it and he didn't even list it for sale. He just stuck a sign in the window, and I picked up the phone and called. Literally it was on Easter, it was 2 weeks ago today. And I told him that we might be interested. He told us the price. We told him that we might be interested in doing like a cash sale, which he was pleased with. We didn't end up using realtors. He didn't have a realtor, we didn't have a realtor. We didn't have to do mortgage lending. So it really sped up the process and everything just went extremely fast. And within 2 weeks, we were in the house.
Yeah, and I've had a couple people that I've told about the house now ask why we chose to pay cash instead of getting a mortgage with mortgage rates so low. And that's a good question. Initially, I thought that even though we had cash to pay for a house, I thought that I would still get a mortgage just to take advantage of the low rates and invest the money instead. But the way it turned out is we were able to negotiate a pretty big discount on the asking price by paying cash and being able to close quickly. We closed pretty much within 8 or 9 days of first finding the property. So that is obviously a big advantage to a seller. So he was willing to take a lower price than what he was asking. Also, we didn't have to deal with as many closing costs. Our closing costs were very minimal compared to when you're taking a loan through the bank. So even though the mortgage rates are very low right now, we saved, I would estimate we saved between $7,000 and $8,000 between the lower asking price and the lower closing costs. So because of those things, it made more sense for us to pay cash out of pocket than to get a mortgage.
So it worked out really well. In terms of our future plans, so a lot of people choose, and we're going to talk a little bit about what some other travelers have done. We've always thought about renting out part of our space when we're gone. So the townhouse with the remodeling is 3 floors. It used to only be a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath. With the remodel, they finished the entire basement and added an additional bedroom and full bath. So now it's a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath house. So right now with our family member living downstairs, that's basically its own kind of suite down there. If our family situation changes and we don't need to rent the downstairs to a family member anymore, in the future we could turn that into an efficiency really easily, and we would rent it to either someone long-term or short-term rentals, preferably probably like a travel therapist or a travel nurse who is going to be coming through for 3 to 6 months. That would be a perfect space down there that has a lot of rental opportunity. In addition, upstairs we have 3 bedrooms, the master and then 2 smaller bedrooms. We plan on, when we're not here, renting out one of the bedrooms up there as a guest bedroom and the other one as an office. So basically how this would work, and we're going to get into talking about some of the tax home stuff because people have questions about that. If you maintain your home as a tax home and you choose to rent out some or all of it, you need to maintain at least one space in the house that will always be yours. So for us, what we'll do is we'll put a lock on the master bedroom door and just keep that separate for us. And in the terms of the lease agreement with the individual who's renting, it would say they are renting this 1 bedroom and they would have access to the office and the bathroom, but then they wouldn't have access to our bedroom because that's where we live as our tax home. And then they would basically just share the main floor, which has a kitchen and a living area, which is where we're sitting now, with the person who lives downstairs. So this house is not only really good for us currently, but it also has a lot of potential for rental opportunities in the future.
Yeah, so the downstairs is essentially, if you put a kitchenette, it would be an efficiency apartment, and we could do that in the future, which really, a big thing about buying for me was that it had to be a good investment property for the future. I definitely look at things more as investments than buying for emotional appeal or whatever. So this place made a lot of sense, not only as potentially a long-term rental in the future if we move out, but also, like Whitney said, renting out downstairs and potentially a room upstairs as well, while still keeping a room for ourselves for a tax home. So really, it's a hard situation to beat. And we, like I said initially, we were looking for a 2 or 3 bedroom, but the main reason we were looking for a a 3-bedroom in reality was that 3 bedrooms always have a little bit more living space, and that's what we wanted. But we didn't actually need 3 bedrooms. We really only needed 2. So if we got a 3rd bedroom, or in this case a 4th bedroom as well, we were planning to rent that out to a traveler, like a traveling nurse or a traveling therapist. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future.
Yep. So we're going to get into talking a little bit more detail about kind of tax homes and other traveler situations. But really quickly, if you're watching, we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions for us. I think we're going to try to hit a lot of the key questions that you might have. You know, we're going to talk about mortgages and property managers and that kind of stuff. But if you're getting any value out of this video, if you could just click the like button. If you have a question or a comment for us, we'd love to hear about your situation. You know, say, hey, I'm a traveler and I own my own home, or hey, I'm a traveler and I rent a room in a house. You know, just kind of let us know what your situation is. We'd love to hear from you.
So first thing, obviously we were very fortunate to be able to save up a lot of money over the years and pay cash for this place. Almost every traveler that we talk to that is interested in buying a house, potentially for their tax home or maybe renting it out or something like that, they're almost never in the same situation. They're looking for, how can I get a mortgage as a traveler? So we really want to hit on that first. In general, it varies a lot, like almost anything. It depends, but lenders have different requirements. And as a traveler, the thing that makes it more difficult than a regular job is that part of our compensation is reimbursements for living expenses, so housing, meals, incidentals. So usually the actual taxable portion of our pay is not very high. The majority of lenders go by that taxable portion of your pay, which means that for most travelers, they're not going to be able to qualify for as big of a mortgage. So if they're trying to buy a house that's more expensive, then you have to find a lender that is willing to consider your stipends in addition to the taxable pay as a total compensation.
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest questions we hear a lot. Like, once somebody has been a traveler for a little while and say that they were renting a place back home as their tax home, and then later in life they were like, you know, it might be time for me to settle down and buy a house, and they have concerns. They're like, am I going to qualify for a mortgage? Because quite often our taxable portion of our pay, which is all they look at, might only be somewhere between $15 to $25 an hour. And, you know, even though you actually bring home more than that, that's what the lender might look at. So when I spoke with this week, I kind of interviewed or talked to a few different travelers. That was one of my questions. I said, did you have a problem qualifying for a mortgage? And we got some different feedback. So
yeah, the answers are kind of across the board. Some people don't have any trouble with it. Part of it, in addition, depends on how big your down payment is. Obviously, the bigger your down payment, the more flexible lenders are going to be based on your income. Just because then you have more skin in the game. If you default on the mortgage, then they have, say, 20% in the property already, so it's better for them. So they're going to be more lenient with you. The other thing is your credit score. So someone with a big down payment and a good credit score is going to have a much different situation than someone with a 2.5% down payment and a poor credit score. So that's a big factor, and that's probably a lot why travelers have such different experiences. But yeah, and
it also depends on the price of the house. So if you are in a low cost of living area and you're only looking at buying a house or a condo or something in the $100,000 range, you might not have trouble even with a salary of $25 an hour. But if you're looking at buying a $500,000 house, then you might have more trouble. The other thing is, and I learned a little bit about this too because I'm still learning because we've never gotten a mortgage. So Jared was explaining to me earlier the difference in the length of the loan. So some travelers had told me that they were not able to get approved for a 15-year mortgage, but they were able to get approved for a 30-year mortgage.
Yeah, and Wendy didn't understand why that might be. Well, the reason is a 30-year mortgage is always going to have a lower payment than a 15-year mortgage. So if a lender is worried about you not being able to make the payment, then they're assessing your income versus that payment amount. So there are situations where a traveler might not be able to get a 15-year mortgage, even though that's something they want to pay it off quicker, but they might be able to get a 30-year mortgage. Mm-hmm. In general, that's not a huge deal. You usually have a little higher interest rate on a 30-year mortgage than a 15-year mortgage, but you can always make additional payments or make bigger payments on a 30-year mortgage if that's all you can qualify for.
So a couple of travelers told us that they did have some trouble qualifying for a mortgage, and a couple of them ended up being able to use a cosigner if that was an opportunity they had. So maybe their spouse, between their two incomes, they were able to have a cosigner, or some of them had a parent do a cosign for them. Now some other travelers, like Jared said, didn't have any problem. Like we talked to a couple that because of their length of work history. Apparently some lenders, even though you make, an hourly that's this much and a stipend that's this much, if they're able to look at your length of work history, they can kind of get a bit better picture of the fact that you do have consistent income. It's not the same as somebody with a permanent salary, but they might say, okay, you've consistently been doing this travel thing and you usually work 9 to 11 months out of the year, and they can see that work history and they're able to take that into consideration. Another therapist told us that he had good luck by going through a local bank. So if you have a good relationship with a local lender, like a credit union or something like that, they may be more willing to go to bat for you and hear you out if you explain, okay, this is how my salary works. Can you work with me? Now, the last option that we heard, this was really interesting, is that there's a therapist that told us that he was able to get connected with a certain lender that he knew through his recruiter. So this particular mortgage professional had worked with traveling healthcare professionals across the country. And that was really interesting because they were able to actually take into account the stipends and our whole pay package. And they just get it because they work with lending to travelers.
Yeah, and there's not just one person that does that. You can find many lenders that will do that. It's just that you have to put in a little more time to seek them out, because traveling healthcare and not just traveling healthcare, but every traveling profession is similar, where part of the compensation is basically stipends. So anyone that is familiar with that kind of situation, or anyone that you can talk to that is in charge of making lending decisions, if you can explain that situation to them and how long you've been doing it and things like that, you're much more likely to have them approve you for a loan.
Yep. So if you're interested in finding out somebody who has that information, we can pass that name along to you, or you can always ask your recruiter or somebody that works at your travel company if they know of someone that has worked with their travelers in the past that was able to do that. So those are just some options to kind of think about when it comes to mortgage lending for buying a house.
Yep. So the main takeaway there is, if you want a big mortgage, if you're an expensive place and you're trying to get qualify for a bigger mortgage, then you want to find someone that will take stipends into account. If you don't need that, then it's not a big deal. You can usually just go off of your taxable income. And then the other thing is, you have to look at it from their point of view. These are just contracts, so there's no guarantee that you're going to have consistent work. So you need to have some length of work history and some proof of how much you've worked each year for a couple of years, and then that will put you in a better position to get approved for a mortgage.
So there's some more stuff about home owning that we want to talk about, but one concept I just want to touch on real quick is some people want to know, like, are you better off if you own your own home or rent a place or rent a room in a house or that sort of thing? Because we all have to, if you choose to maintain a tax home in order to be qualified for receiving the tax-free stipends, which is what makes part of our pay so lucrative, our take-home pay, you need to be following the rules and maintaining a tax home, whether that's owning your own house, renting a room at somebody's house like a family member, or renting an apartment. So we kind of want to just touch on, like, what would be the differences there and what are some factors to consider.
Yeah, so for some people that might be watching this that aren't current travelers, I know the majority are current travelers, but yeah, the majority of people, probably 95% or more travelers, have a tax home in order to get tax-free stipends, because almost always the cost of maintaining a tax home is less than the amount that you would lose by not having that tax home, by having all of your pay taxed. In general, you would expect probably $300 or $400 a month, or $300 or $400 a week less if you don't have a tax home, because all of that pay is taxed. Versus, if you rent a room in a house, you can usually get that for maybe $300 or $400 a week. So you're saving, $300 or $400 a month. You're saving quite a bit of money there by having a tax home. So yeah, in terms of whether it's better to rent a place or buy a place, it really depends on your market. It depends on how much you're traveling each year. It depends on how much you value your own space, those kind of things.
And a lot of people aren't gonna have a choice, of course. I mean, so look at your life situation right now. If you are a permanent therapist who's been working for a while and you own your own home, okay, well now you need to decide, okay, if I decide to leave this permanent situation and go travel, am I gonna keep my house? Probably, unless you're in a position. I know we know one therapist, Judy, that said that she owned her own home, but then when she became a traveler, her life situation changed and she decided to sell her house because to her, it wasn't financially worth it or whatever her reason was to keep that house and be away 9, 10, 11 months out of the year. Now, other people might be just coming out of school and maybe you have the opportunity to live with a family member as your tax home, or maybe you have the opportunity to keep an apartment or a rental that you already had. But some people might be in a transition period where they're like, well, I am in an apartment, but I have the opportunity to get rid of that lease and go rent a room in a house, or I have the opportunity to buy something and then leave. So you just kind of need to, like Jared said, take into account the housing market in your area, how much money you're going to be putting out each month, because if you have to maintain a whole mortgage and a house while you're gone and your payment every month is $1,000 or $2,000 after utilities and everything, and then you're also having to pay for a second dwelling while you're away as a traveler, that can add up fast.
Yeah, so financially, the best situation is to own a house, a reasonably priced house, as your tax home, and then rent it out enough to cover the mortgage payment.
Yep.
Or all the expenses on the house. And that way, you have a tax home, but it really doesn't cost you anything. So we want to talk about how you might go about doing that, some of the pros and cons there.
Or of course, renting a room in a house. If you're willing to do that, that could be pretty cheap as well.
Pretty cheap, but you still are going to have some kind of output there. So if you are able to rent rooms in your house while you're gone, keep a room for yourself, and break even or come out ahead, then that is a wonderful situation. Mm-hmm. So there's pretty much two ways that you can do that. One is that you could keep a room for yourself, like we were talking about earlier, and rent out the rest of the rooms and do that while you're there, while you're in town, and while you're gone. But obviously that can be difficult because you'd have to find a renter that would be okay with renting the rest of the house or just renting a room, one of the rooms that are available in the house. Mm-hmm. Another option, if that doesn't work out, is basically like an Airbnb, where you could rent your own place. You could rent the entire place, but just a portion of the year. So essentially, the way that would work is for that to be counted as your tax home, you would have to still have that place available for you at least a month or two per year. But that means that you're free to rent it out the other 10 months of the year if you can. So either you keep a room for yourself or you rent the entire place, but just a portion of the year. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And we spoke with actually a few different travelers when I was kind of interviewing them this week. And a lot of them are doing some combination of that. And it was really cool to hear just some different ways that people are doing things, because this is something that Jared and I have been thinking about, talking about for years. And we're finally able to kind of jump in and get our hands dirty a little bit with doing it. But it was cool to hear from some other travelers that are already doing it. Like we talked about earlier, you really have to think about your housing market, how much mortgage you're paying or whatever your expenses are versus how much money you can bring in rental income. And also there's going to be other things we need to think about, like who's going to manage the property for you while you're gone and that sort of thing. So you would need to decide if it was something that you're comfortable with, if it's something that's going to be financially lucrative, because I know that I spoke with one traveler who said that it really wasn't financially lucrative for them, because by the time they had their mortgage and everything and the amount that they were able to rent it out for and pay a property manager to do it, they didn't come out ahead. So it's not always perfect, but there are a lot of ways that you can come out ahead.
Yeah, and that's very dependent on the location and the individual house you choose. So like I mentioned earlier, I would only have bought a place if it made sense as a long-term investment, which this one does. But there are tons of houses in our area where we could have spent $250,000 or $300,000 that would only rent for about the same as this place would. That was much cheaper. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on what you buy, what area you live in, and all of those things. But there are situations where you can set it up where you have no living expenses, essentially, because you're renting out the place while you're gone, and that covers the tax home expenses.
Yep. Hey guys, thank y'all for just those of you that are tuning in. Abby, Adrian, Nick, Sierra, Suzanne, Mariah, Ray, Darty, and Jennifer. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Again, if you have any questions about anything we're talking about, or if you want to give any feedback about your own situation, please just comment below. So we're just going to talk a little bit more about kind of what we heard from other people, what they're doing in terms of renting out their own properties. Jared, do you also want to just kind of tell them, he's done a ton of research on this, he's been researching it for years, just kind of about like the 1% rule when you're looking at buying a property versus renting it out?
Well, so there's a kind of a rule in real estate investing It's a rule of thumb, like kind of a back of the envelope type calculation thing, where it's called the 1% rule. And essentially, I don't know why I keep saying essentially, but the purchase price, whatever the purchase price is, you want to get about 1% of that purchase price in rent. And if you can do that, then chances are that it's a pretty good rental unit for a real estate investor. So what that would mean is if you have a $100,000 purchase price on a house or a townhouse or whatever condo, if you can rent that place for $1,000 a month, then you're probably going to come out ahead. And that's just basically a quick way to determine if a deal makes sense at all to pursue. So that's the 1% rule. And that's kind of what I went by when buying this place.
Mm-hmm. And that would really, I mean, that's more for if you're buying a property just for the purpose of renting it out, but you could kind of look at that in terms of your expenses versus how much you can make if you own the house and you're trying to rent it while you're gone. So if your mortgage or whatever is $1,000 a month and you can try to get about $1,000 or maybe a little bit less or a little bit more out of your renters each month, then you'd be coming out pretty well ahead. And then you also have to account for things like the property manager. So several people that we talked to kind of did different things in terms of managing the property. Some of them had family or friends that were in the area, which would be our situation. We'll have a family member right here, a few family members right here who can help. So we don't have to hire anybody to do anything. You know, we might pay our family member if they need a little bit throughout the year to help. But basically they can help with the turnover if we decide to do a short-term lease, you know, the turnover between tenants, handing over the keys, managing any questions they have, any problems they have, cleaning, all that kind of stuff. They can also manage if something goes wrong and the tenant needs to call them to ask them a question, or if they need to get an electrician or a plumber or some maintenance person to come and help us. So we are going to use that method, having a family or a friend. There are certain people, I spoke with one traveler who actually does everything just completely hands-off, sight unseen. He actually bought properties as a travel therapist for rentals only. He bought them sight unseen. I don't know where he lives, but this market.
I think it's California.
The market where he wanted to buy was in Indianapolis. And a lot of real estate investors do this actually, where they buy a property somewhere that they don't even live because it's a good price to what you're able to rent it to ratio, like Jared was talking about, the 1% rule. So he called up some real estate agents, had them go and scope out properties for him. He looked at them online. He agreed to buy them over the phone online, did everything online, hired a property manager. The property manager comes in, does everything for him, sight unseen, and he pays the property manager to do that. So that's kind of neat as a rental, and it was really cool to hear another travel therapist, somebody in our own little realm who is doing that.
Now, obviously in that situation, he's not getting that to be a tax home. That is purely an investment property, getting a mortgage on it and renting it out just as an investment. But yeah, there are travelers doing that kind of thing as well.
Yep, and then we spoke with another traveler who is using, he bought a duplex, which if you guys have ever looked into real estate investing, a multiplex or a multifamily unit, it can be a really good cash flow investment vehicle. So basically he's using half of the duplex as his tax home and the other half he's renting out to just a long-term typical year lease renter. And then he's taking it one step further where his half that is actually his tax home, he's using that as a short-term turnover Airbnb type thing, where he does the thing where he signs the lease that says 1 bedroom in the house is mine, you guys get the rest of the house, and he has it in there that he can return whenever he needs to throughout the year. And he plans to be in that half of the unit 2 to 3 months a year and be gone traveling for work the rest of the year.
Yeah, and in his situation, it's almost ideal. If we had properties, a duplex around here that we were able to do that with, that made sense on a cash flow basis, I would have done that a long time ago, because in his situation, not only is he covering all of his tax home expenses, but he's actually coming out probably at the minimum $500 or $600 a month ahead by having that property. So, and that's taken into account the mortgage, insurance, taxes, maintenance, any HOA, vacancies, property maintenance, or property management, all of those things. So that is a really, really great situation.
Yep, and I think his, we asked, because we were like, wow, like what market, what city and state are you in? So his was in Florida, and he said the purchase price of his duplex was around like $170, $180, and he's able to rent both side, well, he's been able to rent long-term, the one side, what was it?
I think it was like 1,200 or something like that.
1,200 a month to the renter on one side of the duplex. And then the other side of the duplex, he rents a room or 2 rooms, turning it over every 3 months or so for like a travel therapist or travel nurse or Airbnb. And he jacks the price up a little bit on those to account for not having as consistent of a renter, because you might go a few weeks or a couple months without having a renter in a short term like that. So he's cash flowing really well with that.
Yeah, those kind of deals don't exist in this area, but that would be really awesome.
So it depends. You just kind of have to look at your housing market, and that's when if you do want to use a house, if you have the opportunity to buy a house to also use it as a rental in addition to your tax home, just look at the purchase price versus how much you could rent out part of it or a room or the whole place while you're gone.
Yep. Tony said, my wife and I purchased a duplex. 1 unit pays mortgage, property tax, insurance, and utilities. We rent our personal unit as well to travelers or students needing a place to stay during clinical while traveling. Have also used Airbnb. It works great. Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, that's pretty much what we're talking about here. That is an ideal situation. I would love to find a duplex in our area where we could do the exact same thing. And I think for travelers, that is pretty much perfect. I can't think of a much better tax home situation you could have where you actually are making money off of your tax home while being able to get stipends and make additional money while traveling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really good.
And you guys might be wondering like why we're talking about this. This isn't real estate investing and being a travel therapist don't necessarily go hand in hand, but in a way, I feel like it suits our lifestyle very well for several reasons. One, obviously we're away most of the year, so it's like, why have an empty house sitting there when you could be making some money off of it and you could rent to somebody else? Like think of it like, okay, like a home swap type thing in a way. Okay, you have to go places and rent and stay places short term. So maybe you could have another travel therapist or travel nurse or Airbnb or somebody come live at your house. The other side of it is I feel like a lot of people who do what we do, because we're the type of free spirits that are used to picking up and moving, we're probably a little bit more open-minded, open-hearted to invite somebody else.
Trusting
to invite somebody into your home and have them live there or stay there part of the time while you're gone, because you're doing the same thing with other people. You maybe stay in a room in a house, or maybe you rent a furnished place, or maybe you stay in half of a duplex while somebody else lives next door, and you're moving quite a bit. Maybe you stay in a hotel sometimes. So I feel like it kind of goes hand in hand, and it's a cool opportunity that we have as travel therapists.
Yeah, and with that being said, we are definitely more trusting. Whitney and I have traveled all over the world, staying in Airbnbs and people's houses and things like that. But even in that situation, I would never rent out the entire place with all my stuff in it. I would always have a room or something where I can at least put valuables and lock the door. So that's what I do. That's what I would do. But I'm sure there are some travelers that would feel comfortable just like getting maybe a safe deposit box for some stuff and then leaving the rest of the house to renters.
Yeah. Ray has a question. Ray says, I know you have to take into account insurance, taxes, maintenance, etc. over the years. Do you ever worry that you'll be putting in too much money for what's coming in? It sounds like you must have done those calculations.
Yeah, for sure. You have to consider all that stuff. So not only do you have to consider the mortgage, the taxes, maintenance, you need to have a percentage set aside for things like long-term expenses. So things like replacing the roof, new AC, hot water heater. So you need a percentage each month that goes towards basically a fund for that in the future, because you know those things are going to happen. It just, they're big expenses that only happen occasionally. So having a fund for that, and usually that's probably 10% of the rent that you're keeping aside for long-term things like that. And then in addition, property management. So you have to get a place that cash flows enough to cover all of those things, which can be very difficult depending on where you live. And that's why up until this point, Whitney and I have not done it, because we couldn't find a place that made sense to cover all of those costs and still be our tax home and be a reasonable price and not feel like we're wasting a whole place.
Yeah, so earlier I had mentioned kind of the numbers of one of the other travelers we talked to. He bought a duplex in Florida for about $170,000 or $180,000, and he's able to rent half of it for $1,200. And if he could rent both halves for $1,200, it was just a great deal. Whereas in our area, if you buy a duplex for 140, 50, 60.
Duplexes are about around here in a decent neighborhood, 150 or 160, just like his purchase price was. or close, but they're only rent for $700 to $800 a month each side. So it's a big difference there in terms of rental rates.
Yeah, so we just weren't seeing a lot of properties that kind of met that like 1% rule. This was like the only one. This place, they had it listed at 125. We ended up getting it at 115, but realistically, with all the updates that they did and adding a fourth bedroom, it's probably actually worth like 130 or so.
Yeah.
And we predict that if we decided like in a few years to move out of it completely, we could rent it for easily $1,100 to $1,200.
Yeah, so Ray asked, are you concerned with buying at the start of a recession? What if the market plummets more? Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to buy right now. I wanted to wait another 3 to 6 months, but this deal was so good that there is almost no way, I shouldn't say that. I can't see it going poorly because of not only the opportunity to rent short term, but also if we did rent long term, it would still cash flow, and also we're buying it for probably $10,000 to $15,000 below the assessed value. So I just couldn't pass it up. But
yeah, so for us, this property is a win-win-win. The other properties we've been keeping our eye on and looking at, we just weren't going to buy. We were just going to wait. We were going to rent. We were going to rent the one across the parking lot. I'm glad we didn't.
Yep.
Because we didn't think it was the right time right now. But depending on your housing market in your area, just look at those numbers and see if it makes sense. A lot of people right now are like, oh, I'm ready to buy a house because the mortgage rates are low. But I'm no expert, but correct me if I'm wrong, that's not the only factor you should look at.
Yeah.
Like if it's not just if the mortgage rate is low, shouldn't just mean buy, because the housing prices could be overpriced. Like unfortunately, we had stayed at a property where we rented the basement of a house when we were travelers one time. And Jared looked up the value of that house and actually saw that it had declined significantly from when they bought it, because they bought it around the housing.
They bought it in 2007, and between when they bought it in 2010, the price of the house was cut in half, and even now it is still worth less than they bought it in 2007. So you do have to be careful about buying at the beginning of what could potentially be a crash in the housing market, or not a crash, but probably a recession in the housing market. So yes, that is definitely a concern, but depending on how good the deal is and how many plans that you have, like we have a plan A, if that doesn't work, we have a plan B and a plan C, and if all those things work well, then that's what we follow.
The other thing you might look at is just like how much are the houses selling for in your area, or how many houses are on the market. We were also looking at our area, and like there weren't a lot of houses for sale. So if you look in this one neighborhood that you might like, maybe one house was for sale. So in that situation, it's kind of like a seller's market. So you're not going to get much of a deal. You're just going to have to be at the mercy of whatever they're selling at, because if you really want to be in that neighborhood, you have to buy that one house. So maybe here in a few months, if you start seeing more houses going up for sale, maybe some prices coming down and rates still staying low, then maybe you'll see it's a little bit better time to buy.
Yep. So I want to wrap everything up. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. But basically, in conclusion here, if you're buying a house as a traveler and you want a bigger mortgage or a more expensive mortgage, you might not qualify based on your taxable income alone, depending on your down payment and your credit score. In that situation, you want to find a lender that will also take into account your stipends, which you can find, but they're not that common. So, you have to do a little bit more research and call around, explain your situation. In terms of having a house that you have as your tax home, the best situation is to be able to rent that out to cover some of your tax home expenses. And there's 2 ways you can do that. One, you can keep a room for yourself year round and rent out the rest of the house, or you can rent out the entire house or the entire dwelling, but only for a portion of the year. So say 10 or 11 months of the year, and then keep 1 or 2 months for yourself to be able to come back and maintain that tax home.
In terms of tax homes, if you are in a situation in which you could rent a room in a house of a family member and try to save money that way while you're away, because you're not there that much as a travel therapist, that might also be a good option. If you don't currently own a house, or you're not interested in buying a house, or say if you have a house that has a huge mortgage and you don't have any interest in renting it out, we have known people to sell their house and then ask a family member if they can rent a room in their house as their tax home, so they don't have to deal with leaving their big house with big mortgage behind while they're traveling most of the year. So that's an option.
Yeah, and you also have to consider too, if you do want to do something similar to what we're talking about here, how much hassle is going to be involved, because it might be better for you financially to get a place, rent it out, maybe cover your entire expenses or even cash flow some. But if that's going to be a huge headache for you trying to manage that long term, long distance, and having issues arise, then maybe it's not worth the time at all. Maybe that investment or that additional cash flow is not worth the hassle, because as everyone knows in here that's travelers, we already make a pretty good income. You don't really need to do those things. It's just kind of icing on the cake. So if it doesn't make sense for you, then instead rent a room, rent somewhere cheap, make as much as you can while working, and go about building wealth that way.
Yeah, and for some people, I said that a lot of travelers might be open to opening their house and their home to have other people come through, but some people aren't open to that. Some people would prefer not to have other people in their house. They don't want to risk having a renter. I know I had one travel therapist that mentioned, it might have been Suzanne actually that was on here, said that she rented to a travel healthcare professional and they were a mess, and they messed up her place and they caused all these problems, and it wasn't worth it to her. And you do have to take that into account. Not every renter is going to take care of your home the way you want them to. So you have to weigh out these options. But for us, we're really excited to be beginning this new stage. For a long time, we kind of, like, when we would be home for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we would just stay at our parents' houses, and that was fine for a while, and that was our tax home. But now, our friend Rachel said some people love randos in their house. The Dawsons have welcomed us in their house more than we could ever expect anyone to, and we love that. And they've actually really inspired us to do the same, so we're glad to finally have our own place to come back to. We just bought this big 6-person table that we're sitting at, when really we could have gotten by just fine with a 4-person table, but I was like, you know what, it'll be really exciting when the pandemic's calmed down a little bit and we can actually have people over for dinner or for games or
and Rachel, this table is exactly the right size for Ticket to Ride.
It's pretty good. So we're super excited for this next adventure. Like we kind of mentioned earlier, so many people asked us, like, oh my gosh, are you settling down? Are you not going to travel anymore? Don't worry, we're going to still be traveling. It's just that we plan on probably being in our hometown for the next few months until things calm down a little bit, probably till August or September. And then hopefully we'll either resume some traveling for fun or take a travel contract. But until then, we'll have our own place. I'll be nesting, as Jared said. I can't wait to get everything in all the little cabinets and pick out rugs and all that fun stuff. So we're super excited for this. And hey, in the future, if you're watching this and you ever take a travel contract in Roanoke, Virginia, let us know. We might have a room for you to rent.
Yep.
Before we go, Jared, I think that it might be nice if people are watching, if you just want to give any resources that you like to learn about real estate investing and learn about house hacking and all that cool stuff.
Real estate investing in general, probably the very best resource is Bigger Pockets. There's a website called Bigger Pockets, and it is, they've got a lot of resources. They also have a forum with, I don't know how many people are on there now, but a lot of people. I've been on and off that site for years and years and years, reading things, learning things. They also have a podcast that I've listened to every episode, and a lot of good information there. I would say that's really the number one resource. So biggerpockets.com and Bigger Pockets podcast.
Yeah, and you've learned some stuff. I mean, that's not all about housing, but Choose FI, they talk about some stuff in there.
Yeah. Just general ideas, just the idea of being able to rent out part of your space to recoup some of the cost. You can find that idea in pretty much any personal finance type book, website, podcast.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you guys have questions, feel free to comment or just send us a message. And, we look forward to our next adventure, and we hope you guys will follow along.
Yep. So next week we'll be back live Sunday at 9 o'clock, unless something changes.
Hopefully we'll have internet,
so
our connection will be a little better.
Yep. So if you guys have any video ideas, let us know, anything you want us to cover, and we'll answer any of your questions. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.